Hello, my name is Brett Statham. This is a tutorial on how you can create a virtual machine that runs up in a Windows Azure data center, and then use that virtual machine to develop Windows 8.1 and Windows Azure applications. First of all, you'll need a Windows Azure subscription. If you don't already have one, you can just go to windowsazure.com and sign up for a free trial. It's a 30-day or $200 worth of usage trial. We will require a credit card to sign up for the trial, but you'll never be billed anything unless you remove the spending limit. You also, if you are a member of MSDN or a BizSpark member, have an Azure benefit from that. You can go to msdn.com, sign in, and go to your subscription benefits, and make sure to activate your Windows Azure benefit from there. But however you get your Azure benefit, once you sign into the Windows Azure Management portal, you can then create Windows Azure virtual machines. So on the left-hand side of the management portal is this catalog of services that you can create up in Windows Azure. I'll drill into virtual machines, and I see that I don't currently have any. You might. I just don't in the subscription. And I could create one from right here, or at any time, you can just click on the New button, go to Compute, Virtual Machine, and then you have a choice of either creating one quickly from scratch, or you can use a pre-existing image from the gallery. And that's what I'm going to do. So I'll click on From Gallery. And you'll see that we actually have a number of pre-existing images that you can choose from. I'm going to end up using this Windows Server 2012 R2 image because that's the best base image for developing Windows 8.1 applications. But you could scroll through and see the other images that are available. In fact, if you scroll down, you may also see images that are based on Windows Server 2012 and that have Visual Studio already installed. And that would be a great choice, except that they're Server 2012, not Server 2012 R2. And so I can't do Windows 8.1 development with those. Let me scroll back up here then, and I'm going to pick the Windows Server 2012 R2 Data Center base image. As I go into next, remember that you're now provisioning a new Windows computer. It's going to be a virtual machine, but it's still a Windows machine. And so I need to give it a few pieces of information. First of all, I need to give my Windows computer a name. I'll just call it something like dev VM, maybe 2012 R2. And you want to make sure that you give yours a unique name. Then as you come in to pick the size of the virtual machine is going to affect its performance, but also its cost. So you want to go as low as you can, but as high as you need to. I think you'll find that for the most part, a medium is going to be perfectly fine for basic development work. You can always come back into your virtual machine and scale this up or scale it down, though, as you need to. You also need to provision the username for the built-in administrator account. Now, normally in Windows, that would just be called administrator. In these virtual machines, though, we have to give it a different unique name. So I'll just call it something like devadmin, and then a good complex password. All right. And so it looks like it's happy with all those. I'll go on to next. So this virtual machine is going to be running up in an Azure data center, and you have the opportunity of protecting these virtual machines or collecting them together into what's called a cloud service. And so the cloud service is really this protective boundary around the virtual machines that run up in the Azure data center. And it's through the cloud service that you actually gain access to the virtual machines in a secure way. So the cloud service needs a unique public name. It typically takes on the name of the first virtual machine that you create in the cloud service, and then .cloudapp.net. Really, you can call it whatever you like. Just make sure that it's a good, unique name. I see that mine's valid. It's fine for me, so I'm going to leave it as it is. The next question is, which Azure data center do you want this virtual machine to run in? And you'll see that we have data centers around the world, but I'm out in San Diego, so I'll pick the West US data center. Virtual machines use virtual hard drives. The virtual hard drive is going to get saved into a Windows Azure storage account. Now, you can let the wizard here just automatically choose or generate a storage account for you, or if you have an existing storage account where you would prefer the VHD to go, you can choose that. I'll just let it pick for itself. I'm not going to talk about availability sets right now, so I'll just leave that at none and go on to the next page. So this is the final page of the wizard, and this is where you open up network endpoints in the cloud service to allow traffic into your virtual machines. And you'll see that by default, I have 2 of them opened up, and that's going to let me do remote desktop connections into my virtual machine, as well as remote PowerShell management into my virtual machine. If you knew, for example, that you were going to be running maybe a web server inside your virtual machine and you wanted to be able to get to it from the outside world, you might want to come in and open up maybe an HTTP endpoint or an HTTPS endpoint, or maybe a custom endpoint for a custom service that you're going to create. I'm going to leave them as is and just hit the check mark. So at this point, the Windows Azure infrastructure is now provisioning for me a brand new Windows virtual machine running up in that West US data center. And this is going to take somewhere between about 5 and 10 minutes before it's fully provisioned. So I'm just going to go ahead and pause the recording here, and I'll resume it once it's done creating. All right, and it's up and running now, and that did take about 5 minutes, give or take a little bit. And what's left after I've completed it is that I now see that I've got a virtual machine that's named what I named it and running up in the Azure data center. Notice that I also have a cloud service. Remember, the cloud service took on the same name as the first virtual machine unless you changed it. Again, yours will have to be unique, so don't use the name I've used here. And then if I come down to storage, it actually put that virtual machine off in this randomly generated storage account into a container called VHDs. Think of a container as like a folder. So this is blob storage, and blob storage is kind of like a file system up in the cloud. So I've got this VHDs folder or container, and then inside there is the actual virtual hard drive, the VHD, and that's a dynamic drive that can go up to 127 gigs. Is actually storing the files and the operating system bits and all that kind of stuff. So that's really the footprint of this virtual machine that I've just created. And from here, I can drill into it by clicking on its name. I can change those endpoints if I want to open up connectivity into the virtual machine. Just be aware that these are allowing the packets to make it to the virtual machine. You'll still have to open up your operating system's firewall inside the VM to allow that traffic into the machine itself. But anyhow, back over here on the dashboard, you'll notice that I have this opportunity to connect. Now, this is going to use the Remote Desktop Protocol, or RDP, which is the normal Remote Desktop Management Protocol that we use for Windows systems. If you're running on a Mac, you can go to the App Store and install the Microsoft Remote Desktop application. It's a free app. Go ahead and install it, and that'll let you use RDP connections up to your Azure virtual machines. So I'll go ahead and click on Connect, and it tells me you're going to get this RDP download file, just open it. So I'll say, okay, and here's the prompt to open the file. So I'll do that, and it tells me it doesn't know about the publisher. That's fine. I know where these are all coming from. So I'll hit connect, and it needs me to authenticate. I've had a VM with that previous name before, so it's remembering credentials that I've created previously. But if you'll remember, when I created that virtual machine, the built-in administrator account was named dev admin. That's what I called it. And the password was that complex password that I gave it. So I'll enter in those credentials and say, okay. And then I'm typically going to get one more prompt to verify the SSL certificate. That's fine for me. In fact, I could say, don't ask me again for this computer, and just say yes. And now I'm actually remotely connecting in to that Windows Server 2012 virtual machine. So I'll wait for that to load up here. This is the first time it's booted, so the first login will be a little bit slower here. If prompted, I'm going to say yes, allow it to find other devices on the network. And that's only going to let it see other devices within the same cloud service. So that's great. That's a safe thing to do. But actually, remember, I'm logged in as that built-in administrator account renamed as dev admin. In a Windows Server 2012, the built-in administrator account cannot deploy and run Windows 8.1 store applications. And that's just a security thing, just to keep people from accidentally putting stuff onto their servers. So there's a few things that I need to do to get this virtual machine ready to do Windows 8.1 development. And the first of them is going to be to create a separate administrative user account that isn't the built-in administrator account. And then that's the account that I'll use to actually do my dev with. So to do that, I'm just going to come down to my Start button here in the lower left-hand corner. I'll right-click on it and go to the Control Panel. And then from there, I'll click on User Accounts. And again, User Accounts. And I want to manage a different account than the one I'm logged in as. And in fact, specifically, what I want to do is add a user account. So this is going to be a brand new user. I'm going to call it just dev user. Again, give it a good, strong, complex password. and give it a hint here if you want to. I'm not going to bother with that. Go on to next. Oh, yes, you do have to have a hint. All right, I'll put hint in there and go on to next, but that's a hint to remind you of the password that you assigned. I would recommend if you're doing this for a hackathon, you may end up having to create a number of passwords as you go sign up for various services, etc. At least for the term of the hackathon, you may think about keeping those all consistent or similar so that you're not remembering a bunch of different passwords. But I'll go ahead on the next. And it says, okay, great, we've created this dev user account. However, it's just a standard user at this point. So I'm going to go in and elevate its privileges. I'm going to click on it, go to change the account type, and I'm going to make it an administrator. And that way I know it'll have the permissions that it needs to, deploy applications and install other software and all that good stuff. So I'm good to go here. I'm going to go ahead and close out of that. And now I actually want to go sign in as that user rather than the dev admin user. So I'm just going to sign out. I'll go back to the start screen by clicking on the start button, go to my dev admin icon up here and just say sign out. And that'll disconnect me from the remote virtual machine. And then all I have to do is connect again, follow that same series of steps. Only this time, I'm going to connect as the dev user account with its password. And that's the account that I just created. Type that password in correctly. There we go. And again, this is the first time logging in as this account, so it's got to go set up its profile. This will take a little bit longer than most normal logins. But I'm in. All right, so now I've got a user account set up that I can use. The next thing is that I've got to prepare this virtual machine to allow me to do some stuff to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is up here, click on configure this local server. If you've accidentally closed this is the server manager. You can always get it back again. There's a icon down here on your taskbar. You can just click on it to pull that right back up. And on the dashboard page over here, I'm going to click on this first link, configure this local server. And specifically what I want to configure right now is the IE Enhanced Security Configuration option. And you see that it's currently on. And that's just an extra protective mode of Internet Explorer to prevent malicious things from happening on Windows computers. And we certainly want that locked down on a server. But we're really going to use this server more like a workstation. So that I'm not fighting with security prompts all the time in IE, I'm going to go in and turn this off. So I'm going to click on the link that says on, and simply change it to off, both for administrators and for users, and say OK. And that'll eventually refresh. Don't worry about the fact that it still says on there. The other thing that I want to do is go and turn on the Windows 8.1 desktop user experience, and that'll make this Windows 8.1 UI feel at least a little bit more, this Windows Server 2012 UI feel a little bit more like Windows 8.1. So to do that, I'm going to go back to the dashboard. And this time, go to Add Roles and Features. And this kicks off a little wizard here. And I'm really just going to click Next, Next, Next for a couple of screens here. So I'll click Next on the first screen. On the installation type, I'm going to do a role-based or feature-based install. So just hit Next. It's for the currently selected server, so just hit Next. I don't want to change any server roles, but this is where you could go in if you wanted to. For example, to make this be a web server or something like that. I'm not going to mess with that right now. So I'll just click on Next. I didn't change the roles at all. But what I do want to change is features. So I'm going to scroll down here to the middle. And you see this user interfaces and infrastructure, 2 of 3 installed. I'm going to expand that by clicking on the little triangle and then turn on the checkbox for desktop experience. And when I do that, it tells me that it's got to add in a couple of other pieces as well. I'll say sounds good, add those features. So now the desktop experience option is selected, right? And that's going to give me some more Windows 8, Windows 8.1 feeling behaviors in the user interface, including the ability to install apps from the store and to sideload Windows Store apps. So I'll go into Next. And it tells me it's got to go and install this stuff. It is going to require a restart. You could go ahead and turn on that checkbox here to just have it automatically restart. I'll just say install, and we'll restart it ourselves. And again, this is going to take a few minutes, so I'll just go ahead and pause the recording while that happens. All right. So again, it took maybe 4 or 5 minutes there to get through that entire process. And it is letting me know that I do need to do a restart on this virtual machine. So I'm going to go ahead and just close out of this. And at this point, you can just disconnect from the virtual machine. So I'm going to hit the close button up here at the top. and confirm that, yes, I know I'll be disconnected. And then back over here in the portal, I'm just going to let it restart the virtual machine for me. So I can hit restart and OK, confirm it. And if I go back to just the regular virtual machines page here, you can kind of monitor its progress over here. And again, it'll take a few minutes for it to, completely reboot this virtual machine. So we'll wait that out for a second here, and I'll pause the recording. All right. So that didn't take too long. I'm going to wait just a couple more seconds to give the services in that virtual machine some time to boot up. If you try to connect right after it starts, again, all the services may not be running, just like booting up a physical machine on site. So I'll give it a few seconds here. And let's go ahead and try and connect. Again, just follow the exact same steps. From this point on, I pretty much want to do everything as that dev user account. And it looks like it's having a hard time connecting still. So that's okay. If you do that, just wait that out a little bit, and you can try and connect again when those remote desktop services have started up here. So, yep, that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and say okay. And again, it looks like I need to give it just a little bit more time to boot up here. All right, so that should be plenty of time. And in fact, I know it is because behind the scenes, I just tested the connection and made sure it was working. So I kind of cheated there. But let me go ahead and connect in and confirm. All right. And so now notice I'm in, and you may notice that now there's also a new store tile. And so that's part of that desktop user experience coming in there. So now I could actually sign into the store and install Windows 8.1 apps on this virtual machine here. I'm now also ready to go and install Visual Studio so that I can start developing Windows 8.1 applications. Now, in regular Windows 8.1, there's actually two different versions of Internet Explorer. There's the store version of IE that runs full screen, like any other store app. And then there's the desktop version. In Windows Server 2012 R2, there's only one version of IE. So when I click on this, it's going to start the desktop version of IE for me. All right. And I'll just accept the defaults here. And it's telling me that the security configuration is not enabled. Remember, I'd gone in and turned that off. You can change your home page off to something else if you like, just using good old normal IE stuff. So internet options, I'll let Bing be my current home page or whatever there. All right, so looking good here. And so now to actually install Visual Studio, you've got a couple of different choices. If you are not an MSDN or a BizSpark member, you can just go to visualstudio.com. And then from there on downloads, you can either go get a free trial of Visual Studio Ultimate, or if you prefer, you can install Express editions for the target platform. So for example, if you're building for Windows Store, you can do Express for Windows. If you want to build for the phone, you can do Express for Windows Phone, Express for Web. I will mention that phone development is not going to work inside an Azure virtual machine because you can't run the phone emulator, and you can't connect directly to a phone device that you've plugged into your computer. You can actually work on the projects. It's just you can't debug them because you can't run them somewhere. So that's the limitation of building a virtual machine up in Azure, is that you can't debug your Windows Phone applications there. But I'm going to go ahead and again, I should mention, if you want the Visual Studio Ultimate, this would let you build any kind of app. Again, phone can't be debugged, but there's a free 90-day trial of that. Or if you're an MSDN subscriber, or a BizSpark member, you can just go to msdn.com, sign in with the credentials that are associated with your MSDN subscription. Make sure I got that right. And then from there, go to subscriptions, access benefits, and subscriber downloads. So here I see that I've got Visual Studio Ultimate 2013. That's going to be what I install here. And you'll notice that I could either download the DVD, and that would download it into my virtual machine, and then I'd have to mount the ISO inside the VM and then install from there. Probably a better way to do it inside a VM here is just to use the web installer, and it'll just download what it needs as it installs it. So you don't have an extra copy of the installation, 3 gig file sitting inside and bloating your VHD. So I'm just going to choose that option. You'll notice that inside MSDN, you don't have product keys for Visual Studio. They're kind of hard-coded in there. And then I'll just download. and let it run the web installer for me. And that basic process would be the same for the ultimate trial as well. I'm going to go ahead and agree to the license terms, go into next. And if you want to do a one development, you want to make sure that you turn on this tools for maintaining store apps for Windows 8, right? And that'll give you the Windows Store Development Kit for Windows 8 down there. And then I'm also going to go ahead and I'll just install the Phonate SDK. You don't need to do that because it'll just make your install take longer. But I'll show you that you can install it. You just can't debug your apps with that. So I've got all my options checked, and I'm going to hit install. And again, this is going to take some time. This will probably take overall about 30 minutes, maybe a little bit shorter if you didn't install the Phonate SDK. So I'm certainly going to be pausing the video so you don't watch 30 minutes of percentage bars going across. All right. Pop back in here for a second. Notice this acquiring bar is showing you that it's downloading these installation media from online and then installing as it goes. Be aware though that even if you're sitting, wherever your your physical machine is, this install is happening inside the virtual machine that's running up in the Azure data center. So that bandwidth is inside the Azure data center. You're not affecting your local on-prem network by downloading these large files here. All right. And so that did take, again, just about exactly 30 minutes there. So I'll go ahead and notice again, it wants to restart. You can let it restart from within here as well. I'm going to go ahead and just close that out. I prefer to do my restarts through the portal. And that way I just know it's all being managed. But you should be able to restart in the VM as well. It's fine. All right, it's back up and running. Let me go ahead and connect. And let me jump back over to the desktop. You should see that Visual Studio has to do just a little bit of finish up work here. And I don't really need this server manager. I'll go ahead and just close it. All right. And I can launch Visual Studio. Now, the first time you launch Visual Studio with Visual Studio 2013, we now allow you to sync your settings across multiple Visual Studio installations by signing in with your Microsoft account. So I'll go ahead and sign in now. You don't have to do that right now, but it will improve your experience in Visual Studio. So I'll go ahead and sign in with my brettdemo@live.com. And the first time it does it, it'll take a little bit of time to prep it, but maybe a minute or two. All right, once it's actually up and running, you can see that you're signed in with your account up here in the top right-hand corner. And I am now actually ready to get in and start doing File New Project, and I can start developing Windows Store and Windows Phone applications. Remember, though, that in Windows Server 2012 R2, well, at least inside this VM, I should say, the phone emulator can't run. So although you could write the code and build the UI, you can't actually debug inside this virtual machine. There is, however, one more thing that I want to do. And so if I go to the Tools menu and come down to Extensions and Updates, you want to check to see if there's any updates for Visual Studio. And I see that there's a Visual Studio update as well as a Windows Azure SDK 2.2 update here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Update on this and let that run. And it actually tells you that you need to close Visual Studio down. So I'll jump back over to Visual Studio, close out of the extensions and updates, close Visual Studio, and then hit retry. And I can close the download window behind there as well. Agree to the terms and hit install. And this too takes a few minutes to get through the install. So again, I'll pause as we go here. All right, that took about 5 minutes again. And at this point, I'm done updating Visual Studio. And again, for Windows 8.1 development, I'm good to go here. The only other thing you might consider doing is installing the Windows Azure SDK. And that's if you plan on building web services or working with storage services or things like that that are going to run up in Azure. And so let me just check here really quick. It did actually show up in my extensions and updates previously. Yeah. If it does show up in here, you can go ahead and update it from there. You may find that it doesn't show up in extensions and updates for you, and that's no problem. You can just go back to the browser, go to windowsazure.com. And then on the downloads page, go to .NET. And since this is Visual Studio 2013, I'll pick that option and just run it. And this uses what's called the Web Platform Installer. I'll go ahead and close out of Studio here. And I'm just going to tell it to install, just accept and confirm. And this doesn't take very long at all, but a couple of minutes, and we'll have the Azure SDK installed as well. All right, so when that's done here, it lets me know that it's going to go and pop up a browser if I hit continue here, just to give me some information. And you can you can read up about the Azure SDK and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to just ignore that for now and close it down. And then I can hit finish. And if there's nothing else to install, I'll hit exit. All right, and now I really am done. So you'll notice that if I go back to the start screen, there's not a Visual Studio shortcut on the desktop here for me, or sorry, on the start screen. If you want to start Visual Studio, you can just start typing Visual Studio, and it should pop up over here in the search bar for you. And at that point, you can just right-click on it and pin it to start, as well as pin it to taskbar. The other way you can find it is if you just hit this down arrow on the start screen. That'll take you to a list of all the apps that you have installed. And as I scroll over, I see that I've got Visual Studio there as well. So I can right-click on that, say pin to start. That'll put a tile for it over on the start page for me, but I can also right-click on that and say pin to taskbar. And so now back over here in the desktop, I've got a nice Visual Studio shortcut right down there that I can use for doing Visual Studio with. So I'll launch that. Let's just do a quick little test here. We'll make sure that we can build and run a Windows 8.1 application. So I'll go to File, New Project. I'm going to go to, for my language, I'll go to C# down here, Windows Store, and I'm going to pick a blank app, and we'll just call it Win81 Test App. And hit OK. You do need to get a license to develop for Windows 8.1, so I'll go ahead and hit agree here, and it'll prompt me for my Microsoft account credentials. This is free. They just require you to periodically authenticate with this, so I'll go ahead and do my Brett Demo account. Sorry, typed that in wrong. Cool. And so now I've got that. There was a date on that. They do periodically expire. It's just a way of, sort of keeping up with the developers that are in the program, etc. Again, that's free. Go ahead and just fill in your Microsoft account and go for it. And here we are. I'm now loaded in. I've got my Windows 8.1 application. And let's go back over to the main page. We'll drop a quick little text box out on the designer, or text block. And go ahead and open up the toolbox here. The first time you open the toolbox, it may take a little bit of time to load. I actually had a little glitch there and stopped and restarted the recording. But no worries. You open up the toolbox. Here's the list of stuff. I'm going to grab a text block, which is kind of like a label control, just a way to display some text. There it is. You can drag it around on the designer. Let's come bump my font size up a little bit so we can see the text in there a little bit better. Maybe something like 36 point or whatever. There we go. And we'll give it some more useful text. And how about hello Windows 8.1 or something like that. Cool. All right, so not going to actually write any code right now. We just want to see if this guy runs. So notice now I can debug on local machine. Now remember, I'm really in a virtual machine that's up in Azure. So that's really what local machine runs, is run it inside that VM. And I'll go ahead and execute that. The box with the X is the default splash screen. And there's my beautiful 8.1 application. To close it, I can Move my cursor up to the top of the screen till it turns into a hand, click on it and drag it down. And then if you hold it here, the tile will flip, and that lets you know that it's actually terminated the app. Back over in Visual Studio, if you wait just a little bit, Visual Studio will finally terminate the application and it'll exit debug mode. If you don't want to wait for that to happen, you can just hit the stop button. But there, I see that Visual Studio's come back out of it, and I've got my designer up and ready, and I can start working with my Windows 8.1 applications. Now, you can also actually open up source for Windows Phone applications. So let's come down to Windows Phone here, and we'll just call it my phone test app. And you see that I actually can work with the project. I can see the designer, I can get into the source code and all that sort of stuff. But if you actually try to debug within the emulator, it's going to fail because we don't have Hyper-V installed, and we can't install Hyper-V inside these Windows Azure virtual machines. So you can work with the source, but you can't actually debug inside the Azure VM. The last thing I'll mention then is, oops, sorry, we'll let this guy time out. There we go. I can close Studio here. For source control management, if you're going to be working in a team and you have folks working locally versus a dev VM up in Azure, you're going to want to use some sort of source control. So GitHub, or we have our own hosted source control solution called visualstudio.com, and it's a hosted TFS solution. So I'll just open that up and show it to you really quick, but visualstudio.com. This is free, and you can create projects for up to teams of 5 at no cost. And if the project's larger than 5, that's fine, as long as all the subscribers have or members have their own MSDN subscriptions. So if you're all BizSpark members or whatever, that works as well. But I'm going to go ahead and sign in here. I've already actually created for my Brett Demo account. My own hosted TFS server. So for me, it's already there. The first time you sign in, it'll prompt you for, some additional information, etc. And then over here, it'll tell you to create a free account. I've already got one though, so I can go ahead and navigate into it. And this is where I could come in to create new team projects and that kind of stuff in here. You can set up team projects. In fact, over here, I could just set up a new team project. And let's say that this was specifically for my hackathon that I'm attending, hackathon project or something like that. Etc. You can choose a process management template, defaults to Scrum, but there's a couple other ones in there as well as for the version control. How do we actually store the source? And TFS has its own version control system, or if you prefer, you can use Git, and that would let you just use regular Git command line tools with this repository. This is more than just Git though, because Git's just the source. This is also process management, work item tracking. There's a build server that you can deploy builds to, etc. So TFS is more than Git, but you can keep the source in Git if you prefer. Go ahead and hit create project. Takes just a few seconds to go in and create that, and then when that's done, I'm up and good to go. All right, navigate off to the project, and I'm in. If I jump over to code, I can see the code. I can see sprints. I can do work item tracking, etc. There's other tutorials and documentation on how to use this. I just wanted to show you that that was there. And now back over in TFS, or sorry, in Visual Studio, there's this Team Explorer tab. If it's not visible, you can get it back from the View menu, View Team Explorer. And within there, I can connect up here to my team projects, select team projects, and then connect up to my server. And I see that it already knows about my brettdemo.visualstudio.com. And that's just because I signed in with my Microsoft account and it already knew about those. If it didn't show up there, no problem. I just hit add and type in the brettdemo.visualstudio.com server name, and it would go hook up to it and ask me to authenticate, right? But so that's good. I'll go ahead and pick that server from the list here then, and we should see that hackathon project. So I'll choose to connect up to that and hit connect. And now I can go and just start working with stuff. Notice I've got the ability to sync and commit and things like that, like I would with a regular Git repository out there. In fact, you see I have this option here to clone this repository. So I'll go ahead and attempt to do that and just hit clone. Actually, you can pick the default path where you'd like those things to go, and that's fine. Source repos, that's good enough for me. I'll hit clone. And repository was cloned successfully. So really now when I go in to create new projects, file, new project, and let's say, for example, I wanted to create a Windows Store application, rather than storing it in this default path, I'd want to browse out to where that path was. So that was actually, I think, under C users. I'm logged in as the dev user account, and you'll notice there's this source directory and repos. And so that's really where I want that to go. There's that hackathon project. And so that would be sort of the root folder that I'd want to create my other projects into. And I could go ahead and create a Windows 8.1, app or something like that, give it some name. And by the way, you want to come up with better names than that. I'm just creating a demo app here. And go ahead and say OK. And because I'd created under that repo directory, right, we should be good to go. I see that it already sees the solution inside there. I've got all the green pluses letting me know that these are all new files. As I go in and do work, I can right click on this and say commit. That'll bring me back over to the commit dialog. Maybe say initial 181 project, whatever it is. Why won't you let me commit? Oh, wants me to do a little more prep here. I'll let you go through the rest of the prep there. Looks like it wants a little more work with me before I get all those things set up. So I think I'm good to go here. Now I can commit. Okay. Oh, sorry. And the commit's done. And then I can sync. Sorry. Up here, hit sync. I'll get this figured out. And then sync. Now that's actually syncing it up to the central repo. Other people can now pull it back down, and life is good. All right. I'm going to wrap things up here now. Thanks for your time, and have fun. Hopefully this has given you some good information on how you can create your own dev VM up in Windows Azure and get started building Windows 8 applications.